Hello and welcome everyone to day 2 of the daily creative challenge for Photoshop. Good to see everyone. Welcome back. Yesterday we had a really fun challenge and I'm excited for today's as well. If anyone wants to join in these challenges, basically what they are is 2-week challenges that we do Monday through Friday. So they're going to be 9 challenges total. We're not going to be here on next Monday, but that's why we didn't have the welcome stream yesterday. We just kind of got straight into the challenges. So if you want to join these challenges, you can check them out at behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. You'll find it here. Let me get out of the way there. And basically, if you go to the top here, you can register for the challenge by clicking this big blue button. It says, "Hi Sam, take the challenge." You can register there, get notifications when we go live, when we have new challenges. And if you want to join in on them, you can click the watch video to watch any replays you missed, and you can click get started to get the starter file for that challenge. So today's challenge is hybrid animals, mix and match creatures to create a fantasy creature, use selections, masks, and refine edge to quickly and accurately grab selections of each animal. So let's jump into that right after I tell you a little bit about the community Discord. For the Discord, it's basically the place you can share any challenges you've done. You can ask questions. You can even share past challenges. There's lots of sections here on the left side. Primarily, if you're doing these challenges, you'll be sharing it under the feedback panel with challenge. And we have a bunch of challenges that have been submitted. I'll try to go over this a little bit before the end of the stream, but let's jump into the challenge right away because there's actually quite a bit to do for this one. But first, I want to say hey to everyone. Good to see you all. Rick, Susan, Ted, we got Cody, Stony, Sean, Robert, Jennifer, Roseanne, Valder. Good to see everyone. Welcome on in. Hope you're all having a good start to your week. Sarah, Z by HP. Welcome in, everybody. All right, so today's challenge is a fun one. Let me see here. We got this hybrid creature, and this is my file here. And if you have the starter file, you should be getting the same thing. So essentially what we're going to do is just take different parts of creatures and kind of mix and match them to create something fun, something fantasy. A good idea when you're starting these is to have an idea of what you're trying to create ahead of time. Because a lot of times when you're just throwing pictures together, mixing and matching, it can get pretty crazy pretty quick. So even like sketches ahead of time, if you're really getting involved, can be helpful. For this one, we're keeping it pretty simple. But a lot of times, for example, you might see a dragon and there's tons of different types of dragons, but dragons may have like the base body of a horse or an alligator, lizard, something like that, maybe a lion. So I'm using a base of a horse just because it works well with what I want to do, but it's something to think about when you're moving forward with this. I do want to preface this by saying there's a lot of steps involved. I'm hoping I can get through all this today, but I want you to kind of recognize as we go through it that it's a lot of the same steps. It's going to be masking, selecting, it's going to be adjusting elements to fit together using color adjustments and contrast adjustments. So while we're going to be doing a lot of steps in just a moment, keep in mind that you're going to be seeing these steps a lot of times repeatedly. So it's kind of going back to what we said yesterday, the back to basics with Photoshop. These are all skills that you're going to be using over and over and over again. So the more you use them, the more practice you get, the stronger your designs are going to get with these tools. So let's get into it. First, what I want to do is actually not too different from yesterday. I want to create a background and a foreground element. I want to keep them cleanly separated. So basically the horse on its own layer and the background on its own layer. So what I'm going to do is select my background here, do Control J to duplicate it, and I'm going to try to create my background layer with this one. So I'm going to use my lasso tool. The hotkey is L. You can actually see it at the top left here. I use this tool all the time for selections. It's a very nice like freehand selection tool. And I'm going to try to select the horse somewhat closely to its body just so we have a lot of area to sample, but I'm not going to get super tight about it. If you need to spend a little bit more time, that's fine, but Content Aware Fill does a pretty good job. So I just want to make sure I have the horse selected. Got to get its little nose here. Make sure I'm not overlapping the tail at all. And that's looking pretty good. I don't think we're overlapping. So I'm going to go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. And it wants me to sample the background with a brush. So I'm going to zoom out. And you know what? This background is pretty uniform. So I'm just going to like select the whole thing. I'm even actually going to select a little bit of that ground plane because the horse's hooves are overlapping it. So that might be helpful. We see the preview here off to the right. That actually looks pretty good from what I can tell. So I'm going to select, or I'm going to hit OK. Viola, hello, Fairy. Good to see everyone. Welcome on in. Yeah, I think that looks good. I see a little bit at the bottom here that's kind of bugging me. See right where the little foot was, little hoof? I think we could clean that up pretty quickly with the clone stamp tool, which you might remember we used yesterday. Because this seam, like where it meets the bushes, where the ground meets the bushes, it's fairly uniform looking. So I actually want to select that and just try to like mimic that ground plane right there. I'm going to see back and forth right there. That actually looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. So let's call this, it actually output to a new layer. So I'm going to merge those layers together. And we'll just call this background. And again, I try to label my layers from the get-go because it gets pretty crazy pretty quick if I don't. So I do want to keep an original of the image, so I'm just going to duplicate it again. I'm going to put this on top of the background layer, and this one will be our horse layer. So what I want to do is grab my quick selection tool and do select subject. A lot of times Photoshop has these functions that do a pretty good job. So let's see what it did. That's not too bad, but I got my quick selection tool, and the hotkey for that is W, by the way. It's really good to learn these hotkeys. And what I'm doing is I'm holding on Shift to add to the selection. I could hold on Alt or, I'm trying to remember the Mac commands, Alt or Option on the Mac to deselect. But I'm using Shift Select to grab more of it. We can't forget these little hooves. Now, Photoshop didn't grab this because it's so similar to the background in terms of value. You can see how dark it is, but I can see it. And you can always use different selection tools. I could switch to the lasso tool by hitting L, and I can manually select or deselect. But the quick selection tool does a pretty nice job. But my point is that you never really have to rely on Photoshop for its results. Like if you use content aware fill or you use select subject, you can always modify these selections after the fact. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of tools to kind of get the result that you need. This is not bad. Now this is not going to be applicable for us, this next step, but I want to show you it anyway because it's very useful. If you go to select and mask at the top, you can get a little bit more in depth, specifically with the hair. Now this is something I see a lot that people struggle with, is getting really nice selections on the hair, because a lot of times if you use the selection tool like we just did, you'll get very jagged, hard edges. But there's this awesome little tool called the Refine Edge Brush tool up here when you go into the select and mask options. I'm going to make the brush a bit bigger. And I'm just going to go over the edge where the hair overlaps the background. And hopefully it'll give us a nice result. That actually looks really good. I like that. The mane, we can do that. Kind of those soft edges that you want to retain. That actually looks quite good too. There's this little gap in between the tail, but that's not something I'm going to worry about for now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Add Layer Mask at the bottom. Let's switch me over here so you guys can see my layers. Thanks, Ted. Yeah, you read my mind. So actually, I need to adjust this, but there's right below my mouse right now, there's a little triangle button with a circle in it that says Add Layer Mask. So once we click that, we now have the horse on a separate layer. If I fill it in red, you can kind of see it's completely separated, but I like to fill it in with bold colors sometimes just to see how my mask was. I think it looks great. There's some adjustments we could make in the neck, some adjustments we could make in the tail and right there. But for our purposes, this is actually looking pretty good. So I'm going to delete that layer. All right, so now we have our horse on a separate layer. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to replace its head with some assets that I have here. Now, I pre-cut out most of these. We'll do the eagle head real quick, but I pre-cut out a wing and a lemur tail so you guys wouldn't be here all day just watching me cut things out. But like I said, these steps are something that, you know, we do a lot and then are repeated pretty frequently, so you're going to see them fairly often. So first and foremost, let's get our eagle head before we move on. All right, so I'm going to try select subject again. I'm selecting my quick selection tool. Gives me the select subject option here at the top. And that's pretty good. I do not want the brown feathers. So I'm actually going to deselect those by holding on Alt or Option and dragging across the brown feathers. And Photoshop's pretty smart about knowing exactly what I want. Now you'll see there's some of these fine little pieces. I'm holding on Shift to add to my selection, and you can kind of go in as much or as little as you want. You know, you can be loose about this. You can be really clean with your selections. It just takes a little extra time, but again, I'm going to go into Select and Mask, which gives me the Refine Edge Brush tool, and we'll see how that does on feathers. Every image is going to be different. Sometimes this tool works great, most of the time for me, but sometimes you'll find it doesn't quite select what you want. So that's not bad. The blue is kind of getting in between, but that's a pretty good looking selection. I'm going to try it along here too. And I'm actually fairly happy with that. It's a little bit too much at the top. I'm just going to click OK. And I'm going to click that button at the bottom right again, rectangle with the circle in it. You'll hover over it and it will say Add Layer Mask. That's how you know. And this is not too shabby. What you can always do is edit the mask after the fact, which is great. So this little black box here, you'll see it's masked out. Now, black conceals, white reveals. So I want to reveal some of the stuff that got cut out, like here. And I'm using a soft round brush. You can actually lower your opacity quite a bit to get a very natural, soft transition. So you can see when I'm clicking, it's slowly revealing it. You can control that with your opacity. Just anything that's bothering me, I want to kind of edit it. And make sure you're selecting the mask when you're doing this. Otherwise, you will be painting on the photo. I'm just going to soften this edge a bit with my mad clicking, furious clicking. Let's see. General Kenobi, good to see you. All right, I think that's pretty decent for now. What I would probably do is spend some time cleaning this up if I was doing this for a personal project, a composite that I really wanted to be clean. But I'm actually pretty satisfied with those results just for a initial selection. So let's take that, and I'm just gonna keep a copy in my asset folder. I like to make a lot of copies of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this a smart object. If you're going to be resizing an asset a lot, it's good to make smart objects. So we'll get rid of that for now. I want to show you why that is exactly. So we have it this size. If I scale it down and I press enter to confirm that selection or that change, and I scale it back up, press enter again, a lot of times it's going to be very low resolution. You're going to lose a lot of quality. But if you make things smart object, you're going to kind of retain them. So I like to do that for anything I'm going to be scaling up and down. So I'm going to put this eagle head on this horse body and go from there. All right, so let's get rid of the eagle head, and I'm going to call it eagle head to try to keep organized. The horse body, I'm going to call horse body, and we got background as background, so we're good to go. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm actually going to make a copy of my horse body again, because I like this mask. It's such a pretty clean mask, and I'm about to destroy it. This is why I said we didn't need to spend time on the mane or the tail, because we are going to get rid of these. So I'm going into my mask after the fact, like I mentioned. I'm going to crank my opacity all the way up to 100, and we're going to get rid of this horse head. Goodbye, horse head. And we're going to do the same to the tail, because we're going to be putting on another head, another tail. We're going crazy. There's no stopping us. This DCC is so silly. I mean, like Photoshop, you know, I think when most people hear about Photoshop, it's just people photoshopping things. It's like having fun. It's creating silly things. So this is like I don't know. It just feels so playful to me. Just kind of, let's take an animal and throw a million things on it. So that's pretty good. Let's try our eagle head now. Ah, there we go. Now, what you're going to notice as we go through this, and I'm hoping we can definitely talk about this a good amount before the stream ends, is these assets are not going to fit together. They're not going to appear quite right. And that's because the lighting is different. That's because the contrast is different. The saturation is different. There's so many elements that are going to make, yeah, let's rasterize this so we can warp it around. And I'm using the warp tool, by the way. There's a lot of transforms you can do, but if you go to edit, transform, warp, that's something I actually have hotkeyed because I use it all the time. So I can actually like mold this to fit the contour of the body in the way that I want. This is something I use quite frequently. But back to what I was just saying, a lot of these won't fit, and that's part of making something look realistic in terms of compositing, is matching these things and developing an eye for what looks right. So I want to get these in place first. We'll pull out our other assets. I got a wing, so I'm going to Control J to duplicate that. I just like to keep the original assets in my asset folder. I got a lemur tail, Control J to duplicate that, drag them out of my asset folder where we can play around with them. All right, so first let's do the lemur tail. We got some fun stuff we can do with this. I'm not converting this to a smart object at the moment just because I'm going to be playing around with it so much, but I do have a backup. So we're going to stick that there. Maybe like that gives us a little space to mask off that tail. And I want to show you a really fun thing that I use a lot in addition to warp, and that is puppet warp. If you go to edit, you will see puppet warp right here, and then you can click and add these little points. So I'm going to add it along the length of the tail, maybe like 5 will be good. And what's really cool about this is then you can click one of these points and drag it. You get this little tail wag because it's a very happy horse, lemur, eagle creature. What's cool as well is you can hold on shift and click multiple points and then click and drag that to select a lot of them at once. So I'm going to click this middle one. I'm going to drag that down, give it a little like playful curl, maybe grab both of these at once. Maybe just the end. Pull that out a little bit more. These two, shift click to grab them both, move that down until I'm pretty happy with it. And I think that's pretty cool. So I'm going to press enter to confirm that. And you can see, kind of move this into a more like controlled, playful position. I just created another layer mask. You can see the little white box popped up. And I'm going to mask off with a low opacity. I'm just going to like fade this a little bit more, just so it's more of a transition that looks like it could be realistic. All right, let's get the last element on. We're hustling, we're putting a bunch of things on. Keep in mind when you're doing these challenges, you do not have to put 500 pieces onto your creature. You can literally just combine 2 animals. You can put a head of one animal on another, combine them in some way that you think is fun. I'm just putting these all together to show you some possibilities, some different options, and just have fun with it. So I'm scaling this and rotating it whatever way I need to suit my purpose, and that's not too bad. You can even use the warp tool like I like to do, adjust things more specifically. I do that all the time. And what I want to do is start blending these things together. So let's get into it. Create another layer mask. See what I mean by these steps are repeated? It's a lot of fundamentals. If you get good at masking, if you get good at selections and color correction, all these things, that's, you're going to be in a really good spot for a lot of aspects of Photoshop. Now there's so many designs and styles and disciplines you can do in Photoshop. You can do like graphic design, you can do compositing, you can do illustration. But a lot of these things are pretty, you'll see them across a lot of different styles. You forgot about Puppet Warp? Yeah, Puppet Warp's great. We need to come up with a name for this horse creature friend. Yeah, if you guys have a name for this thing, I don't even know what you would call this. All right, so this is the fun part. We're gonna start trying to blend them together a bit. Does anything stand out to you? Is weird? Oh my gosh, I forgot one thing. I forgot one thing actually. Is this it? That's not it. How could I forget? Here we go. All right, we're gonna put some. This is a really fun part, so I want to get this. I'll do it real quick though. You know, I said select subject doesn't always get you exactly what you need. In this case, it's perfect. Select subject because the background's so blurred does a really good job of getting a very nice selection. Plus, we don't need a nice selection, so I'm going to Control C, Control V, right above the horse body. And now watch this. We're gonna do this real quick. We're gonna transform, edit transform, flip horizontal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip it to the horse body to take the pattern from the giraffe and put it on the horse body. Now, the body shape is actually fairly close. So what I'm going to do is position it there and then just warp it into place. Just messy, quick warping. And now the giraffe's spots are ours. We took them. And now we have them on our creature. Now you can take a lot more care to do with this, you know, take more time, do it more cleanly, but it actually matches up pretty decently. So I'm going to do like a multiply layer. You can try different blending modes, you know, just see what looks cool. That's not bad, actually. Darker color. I think I like multiply. I'm going to double click it. And actually, if you're not familiar with blend if can be pretty handy. Like getting rid of the lighter tones and basically easing off the blend if. It's selected to gray. You know, you can kind of do that. And I'm not sure if that's what I want to do, but yeah, I'll get rid of some of the inner things. So I just keep the spots for the most part. You can alt click it to split it and get a little bit more of a gradual blend if you want. Let's do something like that. What time is it? Okay, we got a little bit of time, so let's do this quickly. I'm going to hit Control U. It's actually good to get this on a smart object. So I'm going to right click, do smart object, and this way it will save these settings. Control U for hue and saturation. Desaturate that down a bit so it fits with the coloration of the image a bit more. Maybe even fade off the opacity. If that's like opacity, I want to fade off. All right, so we're going to use a little bit of time to blend these together before we go. But basically things like, let's do the eagle head. I'm going to create a color layer. I label it color just to keep it organized. Clip that down below, and I'm just going to use a desaturated color and airbrush onto the bottom of the chin because there's these warm bounce light that we don't see on the rest of the creature. It just doesn't match. I could actually do a little bit of desaturation, Control U, again, for hue and saturation. Desaturate that beak a bit, because the image of the horse is really, it's not super saturated. So the eagle head seems a little bit out of place. I think that looks good. Color adjustment. Taking away the green with a color layer. Maybe the lemur tail. It doesn't quite fit the lighting to me. I don't know what you guys think. But I'm going to use a multiply layer. Now, I use this all the time. I use multiply layers for shadow, and I use color dodge layers for light a lot of the time. Now I'm going to pick like a very desaturated blue purple and just paint with an airbrush, a soft round brush underneath the tail here. I'm going to crank the opacity up just a bit just to try to like match the lighting a little bit more. I think the lemur tail almost seems like it has too much contrast to me, so I'm going to do, I can make this the lemur tail. Smart object, just work non-destructively. And the output levels here, if you adjust these, you can decrease the overall dark tones and decrease the overall light. I might do that a bit, make it so it's not too light, not quite as dark, basically lessening the contrast to make it fit in better. And of course, the multiply layer on the lemur tail, we should create clipping wheels. Clip that to the tail so it doesn't affect the background. Now, we're pretty much out of time, but the most important thing is that wing. I I want to do another multiply layer for the shadows on this wing, and you just clip that to the horse body. Let's see if we can do this. Clip to the horse body and basically paint some shadow with the multiply layer, or you can use an exposure layer. If you do an exposure adjustment, that works really well for shadows too. You can do the same thing for light. And then lastly, right before we gotta go, let's get the same thing, a multiply layer or an exposure layer. I recommend trying both of them. I just happen to like the way that multiply layers work. It's a lot more like kind of a painting process to me, and I come from a painting background. But just blending the lighting together on these things, you can kind of play with it with multiply layers and shadow layers. But that is it, everybody. I gotta go. I know we covered a lot, but kind of keep in mind a lot of these are similar steps, and you're gonna be using these repeatedly. So just play around with it. You know, combine as many as you want, and just pay attention to the color, contrast, lighting, and everything, and see if you can make them match a little bit between it. Have fun with it. Thanks so much, everyone. Check out the challenges on the landing page. Join us in the Discord, and stay tuned for more streams coming up next. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.